right, good afternoon. I spend most of my time in New York writing courses for the Jewish Learning Institute known as the JLI. The JLI is I believe, a wonderful organization that creates programming for Chabad houses and communities around the world where there's able to be advanced courses on an array of Jewish topics, whether it's ethics or self-help or history or Jewish values. So a number of years ago, I was working in this capacity on an ethics course. And one of the topics that we chose to address was the forthcoming autonomous vehicle, the fully autonomous vehicle. Because I had read an article in one of the New York papers about an ethical dilemma that the researchers are discussing, and that is when they're programming these cars, and eventually it is assumed they will hit the road. I'm not a prophet, so I can't tell you whether they will or won't. But when they are programming these cars, they need to give them a direction for every single scenario, what to do. So normally, when you see a person, turn to the right or turn to the left. What should they tell the car in a situation of where it sees a person, it's headed toward a person, so turn to the right, turn to the left, but there are people on the right and there are people on the left. There are people all around. What should it do in that type of situation? Should it just say, well, let it go its course? Should the computer assess who the people are, meaning how many? Are there 5 on that side and 1 on that side? Should it make that type of calculation? The computers perhaps would be smart enough to even determine the ages of the people who are standing there. Should that be a factor? This person is younger, this person is older. Should that become part of the calculation of what happens here? And a big part of it, and we're building a lesson around this subject, was where we begin with the question, you put it to the people, and you say, well, if it's a choice of, continue going, and you'll take out 10 people, God forbid, but you can turn to the left and you'll only take out 1 person. What is the right way to program this car? And there are different views on this subject, naturally. People feel different ways, but it is definitely common for some people to feel that we should do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And the greatest good for the greatest number of people in this case would be to allow the car to head toward, however unfortunate it is. And by the way, the wording here matters. So you could say we should focus on saving the 10 rather than the 1, or something like that, is something that generally people many people feel would be the best course of action. And the truth is, from a halachic perspective, it's complicated. It's not so simple. Now, we're today not going to get into a full-fledged discussion on this subject, and I'm not going to be issuing any rulings on this, but I do want to bring to your attention the fact why this is a little complicated. The reason this is complicated is because we have in the Talmud Yerushalmi, we have a case. The case in the Talmud Yerushalmi is a caravan of Jews that is traveling, and a group of bandits come, surround them, and the bandits say, hand over to us 1. And then we will leave you alone. But if you fail to hand us 1, we will then kill you all. So what is the halacha in this case? Do we have the right to hand over 1 person, who, by the way, if we don't hand over 1 person, that 1 person will anyway die, because we're all going to die. So do we have the right to save ourselves and save the community by handing over 1 person who is anyway destined to die? Or do we say, we do nothing and you do whatever you want to do? And what the Yerushalmi says is that normally the halacha is that we are not allowed to be an accomplice to murder, even in this case. Meaning, we are not allowed to grab Yankel, who's kicking and screaming and saying, no, I don't want, we're not allowed to hand him over to them. Why? Because if we're doing that, we are an accomplice to murder. Now, it is true that we're doing this for the most noble of intentions to save the group. That is true. But at the end of the day, the halacha is that we do not have the right. We do not have the right to save the group at the expense of that 1 individual. There is an exception if they name and they say, we want Yankel. So then there's a discussion, maybe then the halacha is going to be different. Or if they say that they want 1 person and there is a person who anyway, because of the crime he committed, is subject to receiving the death penalty, so then there's a discussion whether perhaps it would be an exception. But those 2 would be exceptions to the rule. What is the rule? The rule that the Talmud Yerushalmi says, and this is quoted by the Rambam and is therefore codified as part of Jewish law, is that we are not allowed to save the group by sacrificing 1 individual. The Rebbe during World War II was in New York. And during this period of time, he kept a daily journal. I shouldn't say a daily journal, but he kept a journal. And he would record here conversations that he had with his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad. But in addition, he would also write notes of the speeches he planned to give. Why is that? At this period in time, he was often invited to a bar mitzvah or to a wedding. And when he was invited to a bar mitzvah or wedding, he didn't know, is he going to be honored to speak or not? So he always prepared, it seems, remarks. And what's interesting is, you'll have a long essay on a certain subject, and at the top, very often will say, Lamed Nun, which stands for Loi Nemar, meaning, I never said it. He came to the place, and they didn't ask him to speak, but he always came prepared. So this is one of these essays that he wrote, was for a wedding in the summer of 1944, and he prepared this long thing that he wrote in his journal, very, very dense, and which is why when it was published, they had to write a whole commentary just to understand what the Rebbe was saying. But at the top it says, Lamed Nun, Loi Nemar. The Rebbe never had an opportunity to say this. And in this essay, which has to do with wedding, which doesn't concern us here today, he quotes this din, this law from the Talmud Yerushalmi, that we are not allowed to sacrifice one to save many, which is why the question of the autonomous vehicle is really a question which deserves an answer and gets an answer, but that's not our subject for today. But we understand now why it's a problem. Anyway, so he brought this, in writing this in the journal, he cited this specific law. And then he said, I'd like to connect this teaching with the current war that is happening now, World War II. So there are many different ways of framing what was going on during World War II, but definitely one of them is a war between fascism and democracy. The language that the Rebbe uses is Milchama HaNoichachis, the current war that we're going through right now. And he writes the following. What does fascism stand for? The idea of fascism is, in Hebrew he writes, Hayachid Ayin, Hamalucha HaKollel. The individual doesn't exist. The state is everything. Indeed, there is a famous quote attributed to Mussolini, everything for the state, everything within the state, and nothing against the state. In other words, the individual plays no role of significance and only matters in as much as it's good for the state. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you had the democracies. And with one of the elements of a democratic government is the idea of there's a constitution, there's individual rights, and even if something is better for the state, it may be better for the state to torture a witness perhaps to gain information. That may be better for the Kallah, it may be better for the community, right? But what does the Constitution say? No, you don't have the right to hurt the individual even if it benefits the majority, even if it benefits the states. That's one of the ingredients of a democracy. There are other ingredients of a democracy. This is one of the ingredients of a democracy. And the Rebbe wrote that in this respect, democracy versus fascism, democracy, which gives the right to the individual, where his rights cannot be superseded by the community, that's Toidadik. That is a reflection of a Torah value because of this Yerushalmi that we quoted earlier. Just like we see in this Yerushalmi, where it's better for the group to hand over one, and yet what do we say? We do not have the right to hand over one for the benefit of the community. Fascism would never accept such a thing, because fascism is all about the state. And by the way, I'm talking about pure fascism now, not the way it was used to kill people, even as a government philosophy of what fascism is, which does exist. There were writers and philosophers who believed in this, who didn't believe in killing and murdering, but who believed in the government philosophy of fascism. But that's not a Torah approach, because we see in the Torah the value of the individual. And in fact, we see, the Rebbe quoted a number of few dinim in this essay, a number of few laws in this essay. If a person witnesses a king whose life's in danger, and a sage, a Torah sage, whose life's in danger, there's a limited number of resources, we can't help both. Who comes first? The din is Chacham Koidon LaMelech. The wise person, the Torah person, comes before the Melech. Remember, the Melech is the state. The Melech is the state. He is the crown, the king. And yet we say, state tahin, state taher, it's very, very important. But you know something? There are other things, including an individual, a chacham, a wise person who teaches Torah to additional individual Jews, more important than the state. And then he quoted just one of many, but there are many, many laws in Judaism that limit the rights of kings. So for example, we always hear about the concept of dina de malchusa dina, that if the government makes a law, it's a law. When is this true? when it's true is if the law is applied equally to all the people. If, however, you would have a king that says, by the way, all the people, the law is one thing for them, but Jews, they have to do whatever. So then we don't say Dina de Malchus Dina. You're picking on a certain segment of the population. We don't say Dina de Malchus Dina. The lashon is, the language in halach is, you have to be mashve midosav. So this is another, mashve midosav means you have to be even, equitable for everybody. Equality before the law. So what do we see here again? Here you see the limits to kings shows you that in Judaism, the state, perhaps very, very important, and we'll come back to that soon, but at the end of the day, it does not have enough power to override the rights of an individual. Now, there was a rabbi who was the chief rabbi in Romania in the 1930s. His name was Rabbi Betzalel Ze'ev Shafran. And he has, in one of his Sfarim, he has this beautiful insight on a very controversial passage of Talmud. The controversial passage of Talmud is where it says, Atem kruyim Adam, you, the Jewish people, are called Adam, are called human. Ve'ein umas ha'olam, but the nations of the world are not called Adam, are not called human. What? Really? You can say that? The Talmud says that? What does that mean? He explains as follows. There are 4 different terms for a human being in the Torah. Ish, man. What's the plural? Ishim. People. Enosh is another term for a person. What's the plural of Enosh? Anoshim. Then you have Gever. Gever also means a person. What's the plural of Gever? Gvarim. Each one has a plural. Then we have the 4th one. What's the 4th one? Adam. Adam. Adam means a person. What's the plural for Adam? There is no plural for Adam. There is no plural for Adam. Why is that? Why is that? So he says, let's turn to Parshas Shoftim, and I'll tell you why. What do you have in Parshas Shoftim? A fascinating passage, and I'm sure you thought about this before. The Jewish people are about to go out to war. The Kohen gets up and says, by the way, if anyone is engaged with, any of the men here are engaged with a particular woman, go home. Go home. What? Why? Maybe he's going to die in war and another man is going to take her. So, you're going out to war. This is not a game. The Jewish people are facing a crisis. Why are we doing a war? We don't engage in war for fun. It's because there's a crisis. So if there's a crisis, should be all hands on deck. All hands on deck. I know that you're about to get married. Very, very, very nice. But there's a communal need. What does this passage in the Torah teach us? Yes, there is a communal need, but the communal need only goes so far. Only goes so far. And when you have a person who is about to get married, the communal need is not able to come and to override his attachment that he has to this particular woman at this time. Therefore, the Kohen gets up and says, you go home. Yes, we have a communal need, but you know something? The individual matters too. So much so, you go home. Oh, if so, Atem kruyim Adam. The Jewish people, they have the term in Lashon Yachid. In the Lashon Yachid, all nations of the world in the ancient world, these were powerful states. The individual did not have individual rights. It's a new phenomenon the last few hundred years that many states in the world provide its citizens with individual rights that cannot be trumped by the government. So therefore, in those societies, there was no Adam. There was no individuality. There was Anashim. There was Ish and Anashim. There was always the plural. The community existed. The Adam, the singularity of the person, the individuality, that didn't exist. Atan Kurim Adam, but the Torah from day one, even in the ancient world, the Torah and Parshas Kisei showed us that the individual has standing, has value that cannot be overridden by the community. So Atan Kurim Adam, the Jewish people have this value. And it's a gift that the Jewish people gave to the world in recent times. Now all of this is like legal, political. We're talking about government. But in Torah, the way it works, all of these things always have a spiritual backbone to it. So what is the spiritual backbone to the idea that we're talking about now, that every individual has inalienable rights in this Torah-dika way? So Chassidus explains that this comes to a famous Mishnah in Sanhedrin. The Mishnah says as follows. Why, when God created humanity, it began with one person, with Adam? Couldn't it have been where there are multiple people who were created at first? Says the Mishnah, Lefichach nivra adam yechidi, the first human was a singular individual, to teach you that that is the precedent for all of future history. That every individual who comes later is just like Adam was Nivra Yechidi, was the only one, so too you are the only one. You are an Olam Maleh. That's the Lashon, the language of the Mishnah. You are an Olam Maleh. If Adam would have turned around and to say, is there anyone else here? What would the answer be? No, he's the only one. We should also do the same. We should turn around and say, is there anyone else here? Yeah, but you know what? I'm the only one. I'm an Olam Maleh. And the Mishnah, the climax of the Mishnah is, and therefore, Chayav Adam Leimer, a person is obligated to say, Bishvili Nivra Olam, the world was created for me, which makes a lot of sense. If Adam were to look around and to say, who is the world created for? The answer would be obvious. It's created for him. We should have that same attitude. Okay, it's a beautiful Mishnah. There's just one problem. It doesn't really make any sense. And that's because Adam did not, in fact, have other people around him, but we do. I see all of you here today. So how can I just say it and it'll be words? I am just like Adam, that I am the only one here, the world was created for me. But that's a lie, because all of you are here as well. How is this true? In what way is it true? The Rebbe asks this question. So what's the response? The Rebbe's answer is as follows. Just like if Adam would ask the question, who could fulfill God's mission for me that I have in the world today? Is there anyone else who can fulfill that? The answer would be obviously no. No one else could fulfill that mission. Why? Because no one else exists. The same thing applies for us. Hashem created many, many millions and billions of people. However, every single person has a unique shlichus, a unique mission in life that is not the same as the person sitting on your right and the person sitting on your left. And in that sense, you're exactly the same like Adam Rishon, exactly the same like Adam. Adam had no one else who could fulfill his mission. You have no one else who could fulfill your mission. Yes, there are other people. Don't ignore the fact that there are other people. But in terms of why God created you, in terms of the mission that God gave you, you are actually the only one. Because it's unique to you, your mission. This was an item that Chassidus puts a tremendous emphasis on this idea. And it really begins with the Alter Rebbe, a story that the Frierdiker Rebbe told us about in the name of the Alter Rebbe. It's the story of the lost or confused souls. The story goes as follows. Once upon a time, it's Friday, and into a new village, there is a rich man coming along with his balagala, with his wagon driver. And they are going to rest in this town for Shabbos. They both go their separate ways. The rich man is going to stay in a fancy hotel, and his balagala, his wagon driver, is going to stay, at a random place. And as the rich person is going home from the mikvah, he's getting ready for Shabbos, and all of a sudden he sees a wagon stuck in the mud. What does a Jew do when he sees a wagon stuck in the mud? You got to help. Now remember, he's wearing his finest Shabbos clothes already, but you got to help nonetheless. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. So he starts trying to schlep the wagon, push the wagon. Come, let's move it here, there. I'll get down. You push this wheel. Let's try this. So garnish nicht geholfen. It didn't help. Why? He had no experience in taking a wagon out of the mud. He never touched a wagon before. He didn't know what he was doing. And so it didn't work. By the time Shabbos came, his suit was torn. He barely made it. He didn't even make it to shul that night because he was so oiskemattert, he was so oisgeschleppt, he was so enervated from this whole experience, he was done. Meanwhile, the balagala, the wagon driver, the coachman, he came to shul, and for whatever reason, he felt a little generous. And he's like, you know what, I'd love to have guests come to my place where I'm staying for Shabbos. And so he goes to all of the poor people in town and says, why don't you come to me for Shabbos? Come to me for Shabbos. There's just one problem. He barely had one can of tuna for his own thing for Shabbos. So he's inviting guests. They all came around. They looked at this one can of tuna and they all left hungry. Okay. Eventually, what happened, both of these individuals passed away. And both of their souls had to come back into this world. The Alter Rebbe said. Why? Because each soul did the mission of the other one. The balagala, he was supposed to get to shul early and invite the rich man, he was supposed to get to shul early and invite all the people who needed food in their bellies. That was his job. But he didn't do that. What he should have done when he saw the wagon is pull out his cell phone, right, and WhatsApp his balagala and say, hello, get over here. I have no experience in doing this, but I'll pay you. Come and do it. That's what he should have done. Of course, he should have helped, but help in a way that you can and that you should. And the poor guy, he shouldn't have invited the guest to his place. He should have invited to the rich guy's place. He said, I know someone, by the way, I can hook you up, right? But each one engaged in something that was not their mission. Now, the focus in this story is mostly about you need to focus on your mission in order for your soul to be complete, which is why you're going to have to come back if you don't. But when the Rebbe spoke about this subject, I think there was a little bit of a different emphasis. So often, the Rebbe said a line like this, I'm quoting from one particular place, but there are so many that ring, that sound the same. When a person does not execute according to their unique skill set, but they engage in the job of somebody else, this disrupts the entire Seder Hishtalshalos. Now, for a minute, Kabbalah speaks about the fact that between God creating the world and the actual result of this world is a long and sophisticated system of many levels and many different worlds, and much of Kabbalah, tomes upon tomes, have been written about what this system of Hishtalshalos is. Okay? Normally we would say, it's irrelevant to me. Definitely I can have an impact on that, I can have an impact on that. And the Rebbe says that if I fail to do what my mission is, because I decide I want to copy what your mission is or what your mission is, so then not only is it a problem for my soul, which is the emphasis in the Alter Rebbe's story, there's a global problem. The enormity of the problem is whoa, it's like amazing. Not only this, the entire Seder Hishtalshalos, the entire existence is in jeopardy when a person fails to execute their individual mission. This is the soul for the legal material that we opened up with. Now you can come back to that material and say, Judaism says there is this one individual, he cannot be sacrificed because he has certain rights, despite the fact that we have a community here. All of a sudden, we gain a little more respect and understanding for what's going on over here. Yes, because an individual is not just a piece of the crowd. We're not just another person who's part of the community. That's not my only identity. My primary identity is as an individual created by Hashem for a unique purpose. And the nigla, the law, the Shulchan Aruch, the government policies, the way we have in halacha reflect this spiritual reality of the fact that each one has their individual mission. Now when you think about this, all of a sudden a question arises. The question is, yeah, that sounds nice, but at the end of the day, Judaism has a code of Jewish law and everyone has to follow that. Where's the individuality in that? That's just a whole bunch of sameness. That's a very good question. But if you think about it, you'll realize the following few points. Number one, the reality is that the vast majority of the things that we do during the day are actually not governed where Shulchan Aruch or a specific mitzvah is telling us to do this over that. That's the reality. Yes, there are certain obligations that we have throughout the day. And in fact, many human beings eat breakfast. Human beings eat dinner. No one in the world wonders, hey, you know what? I'm not unique because I eat breakfast. After all, other people eat breakfast. We all understand that there is a degree of sameness among us, and it's not a problem. So if that's not a problem for breakfast, and it's not a problem for dinner, it's not a problem for the fact that I put on tefillin and we have mezuzahs on our own. Because that's just one element, and there's so much of life that is not governed by that. Number one. Number two, even when it comes to a mitzvah like mezuzah, there's not one way of how to observe the mitzvah. There's so many different ways of observing the mitzvah. Many people find ways of expressing their individuality in the way they perform they perform a particular mitzvah. Not to speak about the fact that the person's mindset, when they are engaged, when they're thinking about what they are doing, that can vastly differ from one person from another, even if we're engaged in the same ma'aseh. We're coming from Hanukkah now. The Kriyas HaTorah for Hanukkah, the reading of the Torah, what was it about? Every day, how the Nesiim, when they dedicated the Mishkan, in the tabernacle in the desert, what did they do? They brought a carbon. It's the exact same carbon. It's the exact same carbon. Each tribe brought the exact same carbon. And yet we read it in the Torah. Reuven, carbonoi, karas kasavachas. The same words, which that's why everyone knows it by heart. We know it by heart because we read it and it sounds the same, which raises the question. Come on, save us some ink. Just right, Reuven brought this, whoever the first one is, and everyone else brought the same thing. What's the answer? They didn't bring the same thing. They didn't bring the same thing. Yes, externally it was the same thing. And by the way, the Medrash says this. The Medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah says that even though it was a carbon shaveh, hikrivu kulam, even though it was the same carbon, Kol echad ve'echad hikrivoi lefi daitoi. Everyone brought it with their own intention. They had a whole different meaning. And that's why the Medrash goes and gives you different meanings for each one of these karbanis, even though it's the same physical items, but a different meaning for each one. There is no contradiction. The fact that we all engage in certain mitzvahs by no means dispels or takes away from the fact that each individual is created with a unique shlichus, with a unique mission that they need to engage in. Which is why the upshot of this is that it's not enough to study Sefer HaMitzvahs, it's not enough to study Shulchan Aruch, one also needs to study themselves. There's a story the Frierdiker Rebbe told in Tafshin Hey about a chassid who comes to the Rebbe Maharash. The fourth Rebbe in Lubavitch, the chassid is asked a series of questions by the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? I think Chassidus, esoteric mysticism, I think about it. What do you do during prayer? I think Chassidus, esoteric mysticism during the day. What do you do after prayer? I think Chassidus. What do you do before you go to sleep? I think Chassidus. The Rebbe Maharash looked at him and said, and when do you think about yourself? And the man fainted. And the man fainted. Sometimes we hear a little voice that tells us, thinking about yourself, that sounds terrible. But according to everything that we're learning right now, the only way a person discovers what their individual mission is if they think about themselves. That is crucial. So yes, we need to think about Chassidus, and we could all get better at doing that. But together with that, there also needs to be that element of thinking about ourselves. There was a Jew here in Australia whose name was Rabbi Mordechai Perlov, and he has a book of stories. I love this book of stories. I think there's a lot of gems in this book. I don't know if it's been translated to English, and if not, maybe it should be. It's a wonderful book. He writes over there the following. He learned in Lubavitch in Russia, and his mashpia was Shmuel Groinem. This is mashpia. And so he writes about Shmuel Groinem very often in this book. One of the things he heard from Rabbi Groinem was dealing with an issue that we're reading about now in the weekly Parsha, story of Yosef. Because there's a real problem in the story of Yosef. It takes us back to the end of Parshas Vayeshev. V'lo zochar Sar HaMashkim es Yosef. He didn't remember him. Yosef turns to the Sar HaMashkim. I helped you with the dream. Please do me a favor. I don't belong here in jail. Speak to the people who could be to get me out of here. The Sar HaMashkim forgot. It was only 2 years later that he remembered. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. But then you have Rashi. What does Rashi say? Why did he forget? Oh, because Yosef did a big no-no. What's the no-no? Oh my God, he asked for help. Rely on Hashem. Really? Really? I'm sick. Rely on Hashem. I need money. Rely on Hashem? There's no contradiction. That's not how we do things. You don't rely on Hashem. Of course you rely on Hashem, but you need to make a keli. You need to go out there and work. You need to go to the doctor. And then God is going to give you the blessing. We recognize that it comes from God, but you need to do. So if you're stuck in jail, I shouldn't write a letter to someone to get me out? Of course you should. So what did Yosef do wrong? Important question. So there's an answer in Chassidus. The answer in Chassidus is a little complicated. We don't have to get too much into it, but basically it explains there's two types of souls. There are souls that are linked with nature and souls that completely transcend nature. Most of us in this room, perhaps all of us, are souls linked with nature. So all of us, we need to go to doctors, we need to go to work, because the way God is going to interact with us is through nature. But then once in a while you have this otherworldly type of soul who's from such a lofty place where this type of person, or she, does not need to engage in anything that's natural, and this person's life will be completely supernatural. So for that person, he doesn't need to go to the doctor. That person doesn't need to write a letter to get out of jail. That was Yosef. And Yosef was such a lofty soul, he should have sat back and watched the show, and he shouldn't have done anything. Okay. So Rabbi Groinem, the Mashpia in Lubavitch, said, I still have a question. Maybe Yosef didn't know that he was a lofty soul. He didn't know. In fact, his mother probably told him that it's a good thing to be humble, and so don't assume that you're the greatest person. And so therefore he didn't. Whether it was out of humility or for other reason, he just assumed, I'm a plain regular guy. So we're back to square one. Why is he getting punished? To this, Rabbi Groinem said, indeed, that is the sin. That was Yosef's sin. In the Yiddish, in the book, it says, Achush tormenit onverin. You can't waste a talent. You have to know yourself. That wouldn't be a response. Yosef to say, I don't know who I am. I don't know that I'm a lofty soul. That itself is a sin to say you don't know you're a lofty soul. Every person needs to know who they are. As the Rebbe Maharash said in the story, and when do you think about yourself? That is just as important as it is as learning the svarim that are out there, is also learning inward. Now that may sound a little extreme. But the truth is, there's a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe where he quotes a pasuk. The pasuk says, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. It's in the Sefer in Bereshis, where it's introducing the names. You know, you have the begats, right? That's what the he begot and a begot and a begot. So it's introduced with Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. But forget that. Look at those words literally. Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, Toldos Adam, the story of your life is a sefer, was man darfem lernen, is a book that needs to be studied. The story of your life needs to be studied. Why did the Frierdiker Rebbe write this? What's the background? There was a Jew who was born in Russia in the year 1913. His name was Elia Tzvi Einbinder. He lived in New Haven, Connecticut, and that's because he emigrated when he was around 13 years old from Russia and came over to the United States of America. His parents sent him to public school. They were an observant family, Chabad roots in Kurenitz in Russia. And he gets older, he's no longer going to be in public school. They send him to the Torah V'das Yeshiva. The Torah V'das Yeshiva. There was no advanced yeshiva for Chabad students at the time. He goes to the Torah V'das Yeshiva. He gets engaged in 1942, and he writes a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe. I am now, he's about 25 or 26 years old. I can't do the math, but you'll figure it out. And he writes, I am about to get engaged. Please give me direction in life. What should I be doing? Great. He turns to our Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. I'm here. I'm yours. Tell me, what is my mission in life? Well, the Frierdiker Rebbe sent him a letter that is a very, very long, long letter. But what's most relevant for our purpose today is the opening page of this letter. It's printed in the collection of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Igris. What a mind-blowing letter this letter is. Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. The story of your life, Toldos Adam, the history of your personhood is a sefer, is a book that requires study, he says. And the Toldos Adam, these details, he says, break down into 10 specifics. The first and most important is the tachlis for why I was born. That's the first thing that needs to be studied. And that item, the first one, can be determined by doing the next 9. In other words, when we study the next 9, we'll be able to answer number 1, which is why I as an individual was born. So how do we figure out the answer to this question? Now, before we come to the points, there is a part in my brain at least, and I have a feeling for some of you as well, that feels that by definition, the way to discover this answer is it has to be like really, really complicated. It has to sound like extremely esoteric. And maybe we need to go all the way, I was going to say to the Far East. How do you describe here if you weren't going far away? What would you say? Anyway, going to Asia? Okay. Anywhere. All right. Maybe you have to go somewhere deep into Northeast Asia in order to meet a guru who's going to be able to help you with this, right? Why? There's a part of our brains that tells us that mission in life, oh, that's enormous, that's really big, so it's going to have to be really, really, really complicated. But the truth is, go back to that story of the Alter Rebbe. That story of the Alter Rebbe, what's one of the big ideas of that story? No, mission life is really obvious. You have the funds to be able to support Shabbos meals, that's your job. You're a balagola. You have the ability to take a horse out of the mud, that's your job. It is not complicated, and you'll see that in this letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe as well. So what are the points? What are the 9 points? First one, who are your parents? Somehow, the parents that we have, whether it's the personalities, the choices they made in life, that our parents is going to be fundamental to who we need to be as individuals. Number 3, remember, number 1 is your mission itself, and the next 9 points are the specifics, so therefore we did 2 points already. Number 3, the place of your birth. Number 4, the time of your birth. The time of your birth. Now for each one of these, by the way, we can spend a half hour giving examples and showing stories in the Torah and from our sages that really demonstrate where the Frierdiker Rebbe was collecting this from, where he got this from. But we're not going to do that, but I'll give a few comments. There was a chassid who lived in Crown Heights whose name was Mottel Schusterman. And he has a book as well. In his book, he writes the following. He did the printing for Chabad in the 1950s, in the 1960s. He was doing the printing. So there's a lot of interactions with the Rebbe. The Rebbe would often call him Rabbi Schusterman. Okay. He wasn't ordained. I spoke about that a few days ago. He wasn't ordained. See, he told the Rebbe, Ich bin nicht kein Rav. Don't confuse this with the other story. Ich bin nicht kein Rav, I'm not a rabbi. So the Rebbe looked at him and said, Heint hat jeder Balabas derselbe Achrayis was der Rav hat gehabt in the Heim. Today, every lay person in the Jewish community has the exact same responsibility that a rabbi had at home. Why am I saying this? This is just a small example when the Frierdiker Rebbe says the time of your birth. 200 years ago, there was no need for that type of posture. Let there be rabbis, let there be lay people, and Judaism was able to survive. Today, it doesn't work that way. And so therefore, the time of your birth, knowing what the reality on the ground is crucial to figuring out what your mission is going to be. Let's continue. Number 5, what type of education and guidance you received. Your education. That is crucial to determining what your mission is in life. A lot has been written about the Rebbe's attitude toward university studies. So, for example, so many examples, but there are letters that recently surfaced about Rabbi Zalman Posner, where he was thinking about perhaps going to university, and the Rebbe was adamantly opposed. And one of the central themes in this letter is, you were raised in Tomchei Tmimim, you were raised with Talmud, you were raised with Chassidus, that is your life, that is your mission. So to go away from that means to go away from your upbringing. That was a no-no. On the other hand, we had in Crown Heights Professor Jacob Chanukah, that was his name. Chanukah. He was in University of Pennsylvania and eventually decided to come to Crown Heights and came to Chabad, and he was learning yeshivas in 1960, 1961. He's so inspired, he wants to give back. He feels that he is uniquely qualified to become ordained, become a rabbi, and become a Hillel rabbi and some college campus. And he tells this to the Rebbe. The Rebbe tells him as follows. You'll do more for Yiddishkeit with 3 initials after your name, meaning PhD. The Rebbe continued and said, and listen to these words, since you have already invested many years in these studies, you must complete them in order to be able to utilize them as much as possible. This is an example of this idea. For Zalman Posner, it's one answer, and for Yaakov Chanukah, it's another answer. Why? Because of the 5th point of the Frierdiker Rebbe, what type of education you received is very determinative of what your mission in life is. Number 6, in what type of environment you grew up in, right? Sometimes it's not the same where you're born and where you grow up. So where you grow up is also crucial for what your mission in life. And now all of those were more what we would call circumstantial points, and now the Frierdiker Rebbe looks inward. Number 7, the talents that you have. Number 8, your inborn emotional disposition. Number 9, your characteristics and inclination. Did this go dead? Yeah. Your characteristics and inclination. And number 10, how hashgacha pratis, how divine providence has dealt with you and led you from your birth until today. In other words, all the things that we spoke about till now was either the way you're born in terms of personality, your characteristics, your talents, or your parents, the place of your birth, all of that. Yeah, but what about what happened to you when you were 16? What about what happened to you when you were 21? That's the Rebbe's final point, the 10th point. This is what he tells El Yitzvi Einbinder. You asked me for what your mission in life is. I'm not going to tell you what your mission in life is, but I'm going to give you a map. I'm going to give you these 10 points. And then he says the following. Every mitzvah that you do, whether it's bein adam la'amakom, bein adam la'chaveroi, if it's how you interrelate with God or how you interrelate with another human being, so you would think, you just do it. No, it needs to be infused and guided by these 10 points. Meaning, I was mentioning this earlier, you need to use this map to say, that's going to influence how I'm going to do the mitzvah kibbut avim. I do it and my sister does it. But you know something? I am going to honor my parents. I'm going to respect them in a way that's consistent with my personality. Obviously, you need to focus on what your parents' needs are. But there's still so much room. There's so much way. There's so many different ways of how you're doing this mitzvah. I need to do it in a way that follows my roadmap. And she needs to do it in a way that follows hers. A lot of it is similar because we were raised in the same home. But on the other hand, characteristics-wise, it's different. And that has to play a role here as well. What's interesting, I find this interesting, the Frierdiker Rebbe did not give him a clear answer to this question, is that the Rebbe in one Farbrengen once said the following. We find in the story of Purim that Mordechai tells Esther, you got to go to the king, you got to go to the king, plead our case, famous story, we all know it. The language that he uses is interesting. Umi oideya, who knows? Im le'eis kazois, if for this he got lamalchus. In other words, Mordechai didn't say, I know for sure, he could have said that, I know for sure that this is why you became queen. No, that's not what he said. This is Purim Tashim Amdalad, the Rebbe said, it's 1984. He says, perhaps you became queen for this. Why perhaps? We all, when we read the story, say for sure. So the Rebbe said, the reason is, because another person, even a Mordechai, can't tell you for sure what your mission is. Mordechai for himself knew for sure what his mission is. To Esther, he could say perhaps, can't say for sure. Because at the end of the day, it's something you need to discover on your own. So other people will give you perhapses, you're the one who needs to lock it in. And I believe that this is a big inyan, a very concept that was a big theme with the Rebbe. Helping each individual find their unique mission in life. I had the ability a few months ago to watch this video of a Purim Farbrengen by the Rebbe, Purim Tafshin Memvav. A very interesting thing happened. There was a Jew by the name of Shalom Doivber Glasman who lived in Eretz Yisrael, and he came to be Purim by the Rebbe. He didn't come that often. He had the ability to come. So he was there. He sat right in the front, low down, like not on the stage, but right under the Rebbe, next to where Rabbi Yoel Khan would stand. At a certain point in the Farbrengen, he got up and he started singing a song. There's a Hasidic niggin that was made by Ben Sheshemtiv. Russian words, I don't know exactly what it means, but it's something about we're all in an army and dun 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 dun. It's a Red Army song, by the way. Anyway, but he changed some of the words, and this is a Hasidic niggin. Anyway, he knew this niggin, but a different version. He sung it. He did very, very different. He gets up. He's so inspired, being by the Rebbe's Farbrengen on Purim, he starts singing. No one knows what he's singing because he's singing this version. It's so off the wall, he's singing all alone. So you see the Rebbe notices this, and the Rebbe says into the mic, help them arois. Help him. You have the old Jew over here singing a solo. Help them arois. People couldn't help him. Who's going to be able to sing? And he probably was a little tone deaf too. So it's very hard to figure out what he's doing. So you can hear this, but you can hear it on the audio also. So what happens? They start singing, but they start singing the version that they know. The Rebbe stopped it. And the Rebbe said, help them arois in sein niggin, nit in dein niggin. Help him out in his song, not in your song. What a message for life. What a message for life. When we have children, when we have siblings, when we have students, when we have ourselves, we need to help each individual find their song, their song. Everyone has a song, everyone has a niggin, everyone has their mission. And sometimes we impose ours on them. No, we have to be there to help other people find their mission. Now, I want to issue an important clarification here, because there's a part of me that's uncomfortable saying this, because it could be misinterpreted. Misinterpreted in the sense that we live in a society that's very individualistic today. And I don't want what I'm saying to be misconstrued as just being some of this, pop psychology that's out there on the radio. So let me tell you what the difference is. What you hear out there in two words can be summed up as serve yourself. I'm not saying to serve yourself. Slight variation. What I'm saying is serve from yourself. You're serving Hashem, but from yourself. That's all of the difference. And it's a very, very important point that needs to be made. And that's obviously what the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about. That's what the Rebbe is talking about. That's what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. That's the theme of what we're asking here for. We're not looking to serve ourselves. What's the point in that? There's nothing fascinating about that. We're looking to serve the higher cause. We're looking to fulfill our mission, not the one that we created for ourselves, the one that God gave us for ourselves. Don't serve yourself, but serve from yourself. Now, at the same time, we're individuals, we also live in a community. Until now, I was emphasizing the role of the individual, so much so that is why the halacha is that the tzibur, the community, cannot override the individual rights, because reflecting the fact that each one is indeed an olam maleh, a complete world, because of the unique mission that he or her has. But at the end of the day, there's also a community. And we need to find ways to be part of a community. Community is very, very important. I don't want to bore you with the sources. They're all there, trust me. Community is very, very important to a Jewish life. So essentially, what does this mean? How does it balance? How do we have both? How do we have the individual and the community? So there's this fascinating letter of the Rebbe, written to a man named Kaddish Luz in the summer of 1964. Kaddish Luz was a Mapainik in Israel. He was involved in government. He was a Chaver Knesset, an MP for multiple years in Israel. And he wrote a book called Avnei Derech B'Kvutza, which I didn't read, but it seems from the content that he deals with the kibbutz movement, which at the time, I think in the 60s, was still going. Maybe it was starting to decline, that I'm not so sure. But his book seems to have covered that. And the Rebbe wrote to him a letter in Elul Tov Chav Daled about the individual and the group, clearly because of the fact that he was writing about the kibbutz. And the Rebbe wrote as follows: you know, there's a lot of wonderful things in a community. A lot of wonderful things. For example, one of the benefits in a community is it teaches cooperation. So instead of fighting with each other, we could work together. And when we work together, if two people work together, they can achieve more than each one can individually. So those are some of the benefits of a community: teaching cooperation, peaceful coexistence. You could even produce more. On the other hand, a community has the problem that if it squashes the individual, the people resent it, they hate it, and it becomes counterproductive. So how do we deal with this, the Rebbe says? It seems like the Rebbe was suggesting that this was a problem with the kibbutz movement as well, but I'll leave that for you to decide as you read the letter. The Rebbe says as follows: we always need to know what is the means and what is the end. What do we really want and what's secondary? What's primary and what's secondary? What's primary, the Rebbe says, is the individual. Why do we have groups? Why do we have communities? Why do we have a kibbutz? The idea is to sublimate the individualism. That's pretty much what he says. Because individualism could go awry. It could go bad. If people are too focused on themselves, that could lead to terrible consequences. So what we want is we want to sublimate individualism to bring out all of the best parts of it. And that's what the group is for. The group is not an end of itself. That's what he says in the letter. The group is not an end of itself. It's not like our goal is grouphood. Our goal is community. Now let's work toward community. No. Our goal is for individuals to thrive. You want to know how you can get individuals to thrive? Make a community with a focus on, now that we have cooperation, now that we're here for each other, let us figure out ways how we can allow each individual to shine. That is a successful group. That is a successful community, which means that we need to figure out ways how to use community to bring out the best in the individual. And as someone who gets a little involved in community, it could sometimes be difficult because you're so focused on the group, you're so focused on the shul, you're so focused on the collective that you forget that this whole project, the Rebbe tells us, is only here to bring out the advantage of the individual. There's a verse in the Torah that commands us that we cannot plow with an ox and a donkey together. Why is that? Why can't we plow a field with an ox and a donkey together? So there's multiple interpretations amongst the Rishonim. It's assumed that this mitzvah is not the one that's super rational, that cannot be understood. There are various explanations that are given to this particular mitzvah. One of the medieval commentators, known as the Chizkuni, brings 3 or 4 of these interpretations, and I want to focus on 2 of them. He says, the first reason is, who's stronger? The shoyer, the ox, is stronger. The chamor, the donkey, is going to have a hard time keeping up. It's unethical to put together, to link together a mighty beast like the shoyer and the chamor, and putting them together. That's just not fair for the donkey. Okay, nice interpretation. Then there's another interpretation that he gives. The second interpretation that he gives is that an ox is a ruminant, which means that for the entire duration of the plowing process, he's still going to be chewing his cud of the lunch that he had 2 hours earlier. So he's going to bring it up and putting it back down. However, the donkey is not a ruminant. And as a result, he ate lunch. He sees, hey, buddy, you're eating. Where'd you get that food from? I don't have any of that. And so this causes stress in the donkey, which is why we're not allowed to do it. So seeing this, these two interpretations, not chas v'shalom, to God forbid, compare ourselves to animals, but I think there's a certain psychological insight here that's really important. When you get too close to another person, when the so to speak, the norms of I'm me, you're you, when we this is one of the dangers in a community. When we become one sort of melting pot, all of a sudden I realize I was just tied to you and I can barely keep up with you because you have more resources than me. You're able to do more than me. And that caused me to feel bad. Or maybe you don't have more than me, but it looks like you do. Second interpretation. Both of them are problematic. So do not take the ox and do not take the donkey and tie them together. Keep them separate. Community, even as we have togetherness, we need to breed separateness in a community as well, which is one of the interpretations of the matoivu of the tents. I know there's other interpretations, but one of the interpretations of the matoivu of the tents is that each tent was facing not each other. In other words, I have my life, I have my mission. This is what it says in Sfarim. Not to be confused with yours. On the 1st of Adar, the Gemara tells us, the Sanhedrin would send a message out to all the communities in Israel, Machzis HaShekel, Machzis HaShekel, Machzis HaShekel. There was also another announcement that they made as well, a little less famous. Everyone check your field, because the planting season has begun. Make sure there is no kilayim, because we're not allowed to plant two different types of plants together. Make sure there's no kilayim. In other words, you may not have intended for it to happen, but it could happen by accident. Well, the Rebbe says in one of the Sichos in Tov Shem Lamed Daled, there is no accident in Torah. The fact that the megaphone from the Sanhedrin had both of these messages is important. In other words, there's a link between the two. What's the link between the two? The link is the counterbalance. What is Machzis HaShekel? We're all familiar. Every Jew, no matter how great, no matter how small, he gave the exact same coin. What is that? Togetherness, sameness. Very, very important message. As I said before, there's a lot about us that is together, that is same, and we shouldn't ignore that. But that's not the only MS. There's another truth as well. What's the other truth? Kilayim. Kilayim, don't mix. Each fruit deserves its own space. Each pepper deserves its own space. Each individual deserves their own space. So you need to have that counterbalance. You need to have both. I'll conclude with the following story. The Rebbe Rashab had a brother whose name was Reb Zalman Arid. In Chabad circles, he's called the Razah. One day, the Razah encounters a Jew who's fasting. Why are you fasting? Spiritual progress. The way to spiritual grow is through fasting. So this is what I'm doing. So the Razah told him as follows. I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, you had a community. And in this community, you had the president of the community. He has to retire, he needs to leave, so he moves on, and he moves to another town. One day he comes back to the town for a visit, and he goes to visit the person who took him over, the next president. How's it going in town since I left? Oh, it's going great. What do you mean by great? We built a new bathhouse for the entire community. How did you do that? Oh, we made a flat tax on every single individual in the community. Everyone needed to pay. Oh, wow, that sounds really impressive. And through that, you were able to build the bathhouse. Can I ask you a question? What are these vessels, these cups and plates and jewelry? What's this lying on the table? Oh, yeah. Some of the poor people in town, they weren't able to afford the tax that we put on everyone to build the merchutz, to build the bathhouse. So we took collateral from them, so this is the material that we got from them. Says the president who left town, you're a nar, it's ridiculous. You're never going to see the money from those people. They don't have it. What you should have done is the people who have a little more means should have paid a little more, and those people should have been left alone and give them back their cutlery, give them their plates, give them their cups, and leave them alone. This is what he said. Said the Razah to him, in the human body, there is also the wealthier people, and there is the impoverished people. The wealthier part of the human body is the brain and the heart. That's the rich people. They have a lot of resources. The impoverished people, that's the stomach. What you are doing right now is you are taxing the poor by taxing your stomach, by saying you're going to grow spiritually through through not eating. Let me tell you something. It's not going to work. Just like his collateral is going to remain on the table because he's never going to see a dime from those poor people because they just can't afford it, your stomach cannot get you to spiritual growth. It's not going to happen. Tax the rich. Tax your brain. Tax your heart. Daven a little extra. Learn a little extra. Tax the rich, not the poor. This is what he said to him. So I'd like to suggest as well, an attitude that says ignore the individual is similar to fasting. It's not going to work. The individuality of a person will come out, one way or another. The question is, will it be harnessed? Will it be used in a way that it's serving Hashem? Or will it come out in a way that is detached from that? But it's going to happen anyway. And so therefore, as we think about our own lives, no matter how old we are, and we think about our charges, our students, our children, this is something that's really important. Yes, the balance of both. Yes, there is the community, but let's remember, the whole point of a community, according to Torah, is to bring out the best in each individual qua individual. Have a great Shabbos, everybody.